This conference will now be recorded.
So last time we talked about the data model, and we talked about how you exchange data and what format you exchange data. That resource is the minimum bit of information that you have to send across. Today we are going to talk more about how we actually do the exchange. So this is just a repetition of what we talked about last time. The whole specification is available online for free. You can navigate through the whole specification online. No login, nothing required. We said that FHIR has 4 components: information model, usage, conformance, and terminology. We talked about information model last time. Today we will talk about usage, which is what are the mechanisms for data exchange. So FHIR is based around REST architecture, which stands for representational state transfer. And it's essentially an architectural style for data exchange and interoperability, which is widely used by web services. This was developed about 2 decades ago, and FHIR decided to adopt this architecture for exchange. You can, since REST is just an architecture, essentially it can be implemented in different protocols, but FHIR specifically uses HTTP as the communication protocol. So the architecture is REST, the protocol is HTTP, and the specification is FHIR. So we are going to look at what FHIR specifies in terms of what we should be sending or how we should be exchanging data. Now, just to be, for sake of completeness, there is a development in FHIR on using GraphQL. This is still in R4, in our current version, it's still in draft mode. I know they're working on it for R5. But at the end of the day, it's going to sit as a facade service in front of RESTful API. So whatever we're going to discuss today is still going to be useful. However, for this Connectathon, we are going to stick only to RESTful API because that's the only thing that is set up right and that is established right now. As I said, GraphQL is still in draft mode. So very quickly, I'll talk about REST. It's really not the focus of this presentation, but just to set the background. So REST architecture has 6 constraints, and really the only ones that we will deal with are the first 2 here. So REST defines a client-server model, right? Or it says that the constraint it puts on your model, on your architecture, is that it has to be a client-server model. And so what's going on is we have a server which is going to provide us the service, and then we have clients who want to avail of that service. And in this case, as we are talking about, the clients want some healthcare data from the server. Essentially, that's what we are trying to do. So they're going to communicate via the internet, right? So that's the base client-server model here. So what's going to happen is all right. So the client is going to send a request to the server, and the server is going to respond with a response. How the request is going to be sent and how the response is going to be, in what format, or how the response is going to be sent by the server, that's what we're going to talk about today. Last time what we talked about was how the data that will be exchanged is represented. So we're going to talk about how these requests and responses are going to be set up. So when I say server, in terms of FHIR, what does that mean, right? So we have what we call a FireServer, and what does that mean? So the FireServer, any server which we call FireServer, has to do a few things. That's what you would expect, right? You would expect it to be able to accept the request that you're going to send it. It should be able to interpret that request. It should be able to act upon it. And then it should be able to return a response. So that's what your expectation would be based on what I just showed in the last slide, the client-server model. Now, what FHIR specification says, it makes a lot of these actions actually optional. And what it says is a server is a FHIR server so long it can return a capability statement. And a capability statement is nothing but it's a statement that says these are the things my server can do. And that's the minimum, the base minimum that any server should be able to do. But for the server to be useful, it has to do these 4 other things that we see in this slide. Now, for our track, we are going to use test servers. If anybody has their own server, they are welcome to use it. But otherwise, we are going to use a test server. And there's a site, HL7 page, which lists the various test servers that are available. Okay. So here you see there's a lot of them. Today I'll be going through some examples, and we'll be using this test server, which is Graham-Reese server. But there's lots others. There's one provided by Firely. There's the Happy server, and so on. All right. So these are publicly available, free. Anybody can use them. I think a few of them you can even download, like the Wonk, the Firely server. All right. So let's go back. So now we know about the client-server model. We know what exactly exchanging data means, and we also saw that there are some. We also saw what a FireServer means, and we saw there are some FireServers, test servers available for us to use. The next thing that I want to talk about is I've talked about the client-server model, but there's another very important constraint that the REST architectural style puts on your architecture, and that is that your system should be able to provide a uniform interface. And what does that mean in terms of FHIR, right? So last time we talked about resources. We talked about these are the basic atomic units of data exchange. And in fact, the word resource comes from REST. So it's a term that actually is borrowed from REST. And instead of focusing on actions, or instead of being an action-based exchange standard, REST architecture is actually resource-based, right? So resource is nothing but a piece of data or information. And what it says is that your resource should be represented in a format that both client and server can understand, right? That's the uniform interface you're going to provide, is one by the representation of the resource in a format that both of them understand. The other is that the resource identity has to be defined in a specific way, which again, both server and client understand. And 3, your message that you're going to pass across, the request, right, that we talked about, that request has to be complete. And it has to, because this is a stateless architecture. So there's no state of your previous request that is stored by the server. So you have to, your message has to be self-descriptive. Everything in the message has to be, self-sufficient. So just by looking at your message, one message, the server should know exactly what it has to do. So, and the way this is done is we provide HTTP works, and we provide the URI, which we'll just see this now in an example. And then we have these headers, etc. Right? So that's how your message is built. And we're actually going to see this in a later slide, how exactly we build it. But the thing that I wanted to talk about here is, so here's an example, right? So we have a resource, and this resource we want to exchange. So we have already represented it in a standard format. This is JSON right here. And now we're saying that we want to exchange this. So we need to know how we are going to represent it, or how we are going to address it. And that's what the identity is about, right? The URI. And we'll see in a bit that FHIR gives you or prescribes you how you're going to set up your URI. But this is an example of it, right? So you have some URL, and that URL, then you also define a resource type and the ID. And this will, if you provide this address, it will point you exactly to the resource of interest. Okay, so, all right. So now that we've talked about, so that was a little, what we've talked about so far was about REST, right? The last few slides were REST. Now let's talk about FHIR. So as I said, REST is the exchange mechanism. HTTP is going to be the protocol that we are going to use. So FHIR is going to use HTTP. It's going to use the REST architecture on HTTP, and then it's going to prescribe certain rules that will have to follow. So in general, a request to a server in HTTP consists of 3 components. And one of the components is a request line, and it's a required component. So this one, you tell the server, the HTTP method basically tells the server what it has to do. And the URI tells it, again, like we discussed in the last slide, it tells it exactly which resource you are talking about. So URI stands for Uniform Resource Identity. So it's saying this is the resource that you are going to act upon, right? So that's what that is. The other part of, or the other component of the request that you send to a server using HTTP is header fields. And some of these header fields are required, not everything is necessarily needed. There's several of them that you can use. Again, FHIR will tell you what are the ones that you can use for FHIR exchange. And essentially, these header fields are set up like a key and a value pair. And key and value pairs, and there, as I said, there's a set of them. And the third component of your request is optional, and that's the body of the request. And this, in cases where we use this or where we are going to send this, it will be a resource. So it will be a resource in either your XML format, your JSON format. I mean, you can use one of the 3 formats we talked about last time. But for this Connectathon track, we're going to use JSON. And so that will be your body. But again, as I said, this is optional, and we will see in the next few slides when we go through some of the interactions, we will see that not all of them require the body. Some of them do and some don't. So let's look at an example of a request, right? So let's say I have this resource that I want to create on my server, right? So I have this resource, I know what I want, and I want to post this to my server or create it on my server. So my resource goes in the body, and my request line is a post method. So it's an HTTP verb which says that I'm creating a resource. And then you define your URI, which is basically the address of your resource. So you're telling the server that this is where I want to post this resource. And as I said, we will see that how this address is constructed, how the URI is constructed, is something that FHIR standard prescribes. And then the other thing that you provide are the header fields. And here are some examples that you're seeing here. There's a content type, which basically tells you what's the content that you sent in your body, what format it is in, and what format are you going to expect the response in from the server. That's what your accept says. And there's another one that that is that FHIR allows us to use with create interactions. We won't talk about it, but that's just another example of a header key. All right, so now let's talk about response. So now you created your request. Your request consisted of a request line, some headers, and a body. Now you send that over to the server. The server gets it, it reads it, it interprets it, it acts upon it. So the action was to create, post, which we'll talk about later. It means create. So the server says, okay, I have to create this resource. And now it's going to send back a response to the client. So once again, the response is going to have 3 components to it, just like we saw for the request, right? So the first component is a status line, which basically tells you what was the status of this action, what was the status, or what was the status of the interaction, right? Was it successful, not successful? So that's what the status code is about, and it will also give you the reasons. So supposing it failed, it will give you some sort of English reason there, so that you can interpret. Again, the response also has some keys, some header fields that are sent back. Again, key value pairs. And it can optionally also send back a body with a resource in it. So remember that if we are talking about FHIR, your body is going to consist of resource. And your key value, your keys are going to be to some extent being controlled by FHIR. FHIR will tell you which keys you can or cannot use, and so on. So again, let's take a look at this example, right? So we posted last time, and let's say in our request we had said, let's create this resource. And in response, the server says, yes, I was able to create it. So he's saying 201 is the code, and the reason for that code is created. And you will also get some header fields. For example, it will tell you what date the operation happened. There's a thing called ETAG, which is basically a version of your resource. And then it will also, it might give you server. There are several others. In this example, we're just looking at 3, but there are several other header fields that your server can respond with. And then if you ask for it, it can also provide you, and this again, so this will differ server to server. Like we said, FHIR standard, a lot of things are optional. For the server, a lot of things are optional. Server can choose how to respond to certain things. Certain things the FHIR standard requires them to do, certain things are optional. So some servers might respond with the whole resource that was created, some servers may not. And there's actually a way to control whether you want back your resource in the body or not, and so on. So there's a lot of flexibility in the standard as well from the client side as well. But once again, I think it's very important to note that not all servers will support all functionality. So if you end up working with one test server and doesn't do something, that means, and you want that thing to happen, then you probably need to change the test server. Okay, so with that, I also want let's talk a little bit about URI. So we said, we've been saying that the URI is going to be defined by the FHIR standard. And how exactly does FHIR specification specify we should build our resource identity, right? So the way it does is, it has really 3 parts to it. There's a base part, a type part, and an ID part. The base part refers to your FHIR. So this is an example, and this example you're seeing all 3 parts. And the first part is your server base URL, right? So whatever your server is, it will specify this is the base to use whenever you're trying to access a resource on that server. And the next part is resource type. So last time we saw there that FHIR standard provides about 130, 160 different resource types, and they keep changing with the versions. But so there's a certain number of n number of resource types that the FHIR standard allows you to use. So that's what you specify here, which resource type specifically you're working with. And then the last part is the resource ID. And that's specifically which instance of resource you're going to work with, right? Or which instance of resource you are identifying with this URI. So last time we saw, when we were looking at the resource, we looked at a patient resource example, and we saw that it had an ID field there. That's what this is, not the identifier, right? We talked about the difference between ID and identifier last time. So this is the ID field, the one that is usually the one that is assigned by the server. Okay. So we'll briefly talk about 3 most common FHIR interactions. So far what we have done is this, right? So we talked briefly about REST, which is just an architecture, and then we talked about HTTP. How do you exchange data using HTTP protocol? We talked about the how you set up a request and how you set up the response. And then we also talked about, in your request, you have to basically identify which resource you're working with. And so we also talked about how do you set up that address, right, the URI for the resource. So now we're going to look at 3 specific interactions that you can do with the server. And these are generally the most common ones. And most likely these are the only three you will require for the track. So we'll mostly focus on these three. I'll briefly show search, which might be useful if you're wanting to search something. But again, search can be very, very complicated. It's really advanced. It can very soon get very advanced. Some basic search you can do, but once you start getting into the details of it, it can really get more complicated. So we're not going to look at search today. We'll just briefly talk about search towards the end. But we're mostly going to talk about post, put, and get. Those are the three FHIR interactions we're going to talk about in the next 3 slides. So this one is about post, and this one you've already seen in the example earlier. Post is essentially creating, right? So that's the verb that you use when when you're requesting the server to create a resource for you on the server. And an example would be, I just registered a patient. I'm just registering a patient. My server still doesn't have this patient, so I'm just creating this resource. I want the server to create a resource for this patient who just showed up. And I'm going to enter all that information, going to create a resource, a JSON representation of the resource, and then I'm going to send it via a post request to the server. So that essentially is like posting it into the database, right? If your server was the front end to a database, then it's basically going to post it into the database. So, so I have a request to create a resource. And the way I do this, we have already seen this, is I'm going to say post, that's my HTTP word or my HTTP interaction that I'm requesting. And then I'm going to identify, and then I'm going to give the URI. Now, the thing is, post is what we call a type level interaction. So in post, you are telling the server that what I'm creating as a resource of type patient. But remember, as I said earlier last time, that this ID is going to be defined by the server. So when you're going to post it, you're not going to provide an ID. You're just going to say, I want to post a resource of this type. And so the ID part is missing from the URI here. Like if you see, there's no ID part to it. And that's because it's a type level interaction. You're simply saying, this is my resource. I want to post this resource. It's a resource of type patient. And then the server is going to assign the ID. So the server is going to put in the ID in there in your resource. And the body that you're going to send is going to carry that resource, the JSON representation of the resource that you want created. This is an example, right? So you have post, and then you have the URI. Again, the URI carries the base part and the type part. So that's how you create a resource on the server. The next one we're going to look at is put. And put is for updating. So this is, and the way this updates it actually overrides the full resource, right? So now this one is an instance level interaction, right? So in here, you need to provide the ID. Because you're telling if you don't provide the ID, then what's going to happen is you're going to say, I want to put this resource, and this resource is of type patient. That's all you'll say. But you will not be telling the server which resource specifically you want to update, right? So you have to provide that information. So in this case, it's an instance level interaction, so you have to provide the ID. The body again carries the resource, the JSON representation of the resource as you want it updated. And this is an example, right? So now you have the base, you have the type, and you have the ID. The third one we'll look at is get. And this is for retrieving the resources that are on your server. So it basically, when you do a get request, your server will respond with the resource you have asked for. So once again, this is an instance level. If you don't provide, actually it can be instance level, it can also be type level. But let's say for our purposes, it's an instance level interaction, because we are mostly going to be interested in looking at a particular resource, right? But if you were not to provide that ID there, what it's going to do, and again, it's up to the server, but most of the servers will also honor a request, a get request at the type level, and they will respond with resources of that type, all resources of that type that are on that server, which could be a million resources. So that's definitely, most of the times you're not going to want that. What you want is a specific resource, and so you generally will be providing an ID there. In this case, you don't have a body though, because you are asking for the resource from the server, right? So you don't have the resource, that's why you're asking. So even if you, most of the servers, if you provide a body, are going to ignore it. Somebody might even bomb and say, it's a bad request because you provided me a body. I don't expect a body with get. So again, depends server to server. No one answer for that. And it's an example. Again, you have a get, you have a base URL, then you have the resource type, and then you have the ID. Okay, so that was the introduction, and we have seen some examples, but we have not really worked with them. Now, if you go and click on this, like I said, everything is on website. Go to this page. And this page will give you everything that you need to know in terms of RESTful API. So if you go down here, you will, this is what I was talking about. You have instance level interactions, you have type level interactions, you have whole system interactions. So here's what we're talking about: status codes and the response. There's more advanced stuff like conditional read, which we're not going to look at, but something that you can do. There's conditional update also, conditional create also, and then there's more stuff in here. You can provide these parameters such as pretty and format. Okay, so if you're interested, there's a lot of stuff here that you can go through. It will basically give you all the rules, as in which situations the server should respond as a bad request error, in which cases the server should send a different error, and so on. So everything is defined in the specification. And some of them are binding on the server, so the server has to follow that. Some of them are optional, server may or may not follow that. Okay, this is what I was talking about, capability statement. That's the minimum every server has to provide, and basically it's a statement of what the server can do for you. You can also get history in case the server supports versioning, like it is able to support multiple versions of your resource. There is history in here as well, which there's a underscore history parameter, which can basically get you history. Actually not a parameter, it's an interaction. So that's there, and there's paging and all that. So there's a lot of stuff in here. Okay, so we don't need all that, but just to let you know that there's stuff where you can go and check out more stuff if you want to. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. So I think what we are going to do, and I don't see anything in the chat either. So what we are going to do is now we are going to actually do some examples. Okay. So for doing HTTP, you need to have a client so that that client that understands HTTP. So we are going to use, I'm going to use Postman, which is probably the most popular one, but there are several of them. And if you're interested, you can go to this link and download Postman. So whatever we have just discussed, I'm going to talk about that. Just to show you, there's a download page here. And we are going to need this when we do, for the track, we are going to actually need, if you don't have any other client, then you're probably going to need Postman or something going to need to be able to post. You can actually do it from a command prompt too, using curl language. If you prefer that, that's fine. Okay, so that's where you can download it. Okay, so let's go to Postman. So I have Postman session open here, and I'm going to use this server. This is Graham Grease server. So let's do one thing: increase the size. Okay. So the way this is set The way this is set up is in the way Postman is set up, it has all those components we talked about, right? You will be able to provide all those components in your request, and you're going to also get all those components in your response. But because it's the graphical user interface, it actually allows you to do that in a more organized way. So you can see here, here's where you select your HTTP method. Are you doing put? Are you doing post? Are you doing get? Right? That's where you specify that. This is where your URI goes, right? And then here you have your headers. We talked about headers, and this is where you provide your body of your request. Okay, that's pretty much all you're going to need, right? So this, and this. And then down here is where you will get your response. And again, in the response, you will see you will have a body, you will have headers, and you will have the status, right? The status line right here. It doesn't give you the status line, but it gives you the status like this. So it is the code, and then that's the reason for the code. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, this is something I posted earlier in the day, right? So now I'm going to do a new post. Okay, and we are going to use example from HL7 website. So once again, I'm doing this so that this is kind of a revision of last time. You can go to the page where of the patient resource. You can click on the examples up here, and just very slow. Okay. So here, if you have one example and you have 3 different formats shown, so I'm going to go to JSON. So I have my example. So I'm going to paste the copy this. Okay. Now I'm doing a post. I have my header set up. Now content type is basically saying that the content I'm going to post is going to be in FHIR and JSON format, and that I'm going to get all my responses I'm going to accept are in JSON. This is defined by FHIR. You can't put anything you want here. Right? So it has to be either JSON, XML, or Turtle. And what you're going to put there for JSON, or what you're going to put there for XML, and what you're going to put there for Turtle is defined by FHIR. It's not up to you. And then the other thing is, this is another key that, or another header field that FHIR allows especially for post, which basically is saying when I get the return back from the server, I want my resource that the server creates represented. So I want the full JSON of the resource that was created back. You could have, there's an option you could have set minimal, and then it will not give me back my resource, because I already know my resource. So if I don't want to get back my resource and I have limited bandwidth and things like that, issues with bandwidth or anything, I just don't want that whole stuff sent back. So I can always change this. So here's my body. So this is my last request. So I'm going to change this to what I just copied. I can do it. Okay, so I just posted what I got from there. And then 2 things I'm going to do. I'm going to remove this because I'm not sure if I have this organization. This is a reference. Actually, let's leave it. I know it is there. So no, let's leave it. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to change the name, because this is the one that is the example from FHIR website. A lot of people might have posted it here. We just want to make sure there's a way to identify my resource. Okay. So patient, that's their name. So here it is, right? So family and given. So I'm going to change this. Okay, let's keep his family name the same. And let's change his first name to my name, right? So let's see. So let's make it, okay, let's do this. So here we have, so now it'll be easy for me to identify. Now you see how the example, note the ID here says example, because this we just took from there and had an ID on it, which said example. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there like that. Okay, I'm going to post it and see what happens. So now it's a post, so it has to be a type level interaction, right? So it needs to go away. This is the ID. So all I have here is my base and then my resource type. Okay, so everything is set up. I'm going to do send now. And when I do send, I'm going to get a response. And here it says 201 created. And I can see in the body, I can see the resource that was created. And let's go and look at the name. You see how the name is my name here. So this is the resource we just created. And you can go and check out the headers. So this is right now, right? So this is, we just created this. It's in GMT because it's sitting in Britain. So, but basically, you see how we just created a resource on my server. Okay. Now let's, and oh, the most important thing I want to talk about. So let's take a look at the ID now, right? So you see how the ID got updated because this was assigned by the server. Now, let's do another thing. We're going to post the same resource all over again. Okay, once again, we're going to post it. I'm not going to change anything on it. I'm going to post it again, all over again. So let's do that. Okay, I'm sending it all over again. Okay, it's gone. It says created. And you see how the ID is now 3824 because it created another resource. So every time I do a post, it just goes quietly and creates a resource. What if I was making a change here, right? What if I wanted to update my existing resource? So I already have 3824 in the system, and now I want to go and update it. So remember, the word for update was put. So I need to do a put then. But the point here is because I have to now identify my resource that I'm going to update. So I'm going to update this latest one, okay, 3824. I'm not going to update 3823. 3823 was the first one we created. So this one I'm going to change the name. Okay, I'm going to change now the given name. So that's the family name, right? So updated the family name, and I'm saying I'm updating only 3824 here. Okay, now I have to change this to put. Everything else is fine. I still have the same header. So that's all fine. Okay. All right, so let's do it. So I'm going to get an error. I'm telling you beforehand, and I'll tell you why that happened. So let's do it. Okay. So you see, I see now, and the reason I wanted to do this is one, to show you that if there is an error, you will see that in the status, right? So this is the status line of your response. It will show you that there was a bad request. So let's say during the track, you convert a message into a resource and you try posting it and you get this kind of error. So that request error can happen for multiple reasons, but this does tell you that something is wrong. Okay, so one, and most of the times the body will kind of help you figure out what was wrong, right? So in this case, it's saying bad request, but if you look at the body, it's telling me something here. Diagnostics. It's saying there was a resource ID mismatch, which makes perfect sense because I said I'm updating 3824, but then remember in my body I had example, right? This 3824 was assigned by the server, so I forgot to update that, and the server was smart enough to say they don't match, so I'm not going to update. And this is a requirement again by FHIR specification, and they have specifically made this requirement because when we're dealing with healthcare data, we have to be very careful. Some other, if it was not FHIR specification, maybe they would have ignored it. But in FHIR, it's a requirement that the server cannot ignore it. So if they don't match, server has to bomb out, and that's what happened here. So now I've updated it. So let's now try posting it. I'm putting it again, right? To update it again. Now I have the right ID. And remember, what I changed was the last name, and also remember I'm only updating 3824. I created two resources, 3823 and 3824, which were identical. So I created duplicates initially. Now I'm updating one of them. So let's do that. Okay. So now it says status is 200 OK. Okay. So it was successful. And in my response body, I am seeing the resource that was updated. So see how the response, the ID of this resource is 3824. So it only updated the resource that I wanted it to update. Its version ID now says 2. Initially the version was 1. Now it's the second version of the same resource with the update. And if you go down and look at the name, right, you will see this one has the family name has been updated. Now let's do one thing. So we had two resources. Now we have two resources, right? Now the first one has last name Chalmers, and the other one has last name Palaria. So let's see if we are going to be able to read both of those resources. Okay. So the third operation we talked about in our presentation earlier was get. So get helps you retrieve data and read it. So it's get, right? I know this server ignores body, so I'm not going to clean up the body, but some of the servers will not allow a get operation with a body populated. This server doesn't bother about it, just ignores whatever is in the body. So body is not needed because now we are not sending anything in. We are just saying, I want to get something out of the server. So this time I'm going to do, so let's start with the 3823, right? The first one that we had created. So I'm saying this and I'm sending it. Let's see, headers, everything is fine. Body doesn't matter. And okay, so we're gonna send it. Okay, so it says 200 OK, and it gives me the body. And here I received 3823 back. So this is my resource that I'm getting back here. Version is 1 because this one we only created one version. And if you go down, you will see the name on this, and this is my 3823, the first one. Right? Okay. Okay, so that's done. Let's now go and check out 3824. Okay, so I received back 3824. The status is okay, and it's saying this is the second version because that's the version, the latest version we created, right? And if you go down here, you have the name, right? So you see this is the second one, the one that gets updated. All right, so that's basically it. I mean, that's it. So you need Postman or any kind of HTTP client, and you just need to post. If you're creating for the first time, you'll be posting it. If you are retrieving it, if you are getting it back from the server, you're going to read it to a get. And if you want to update something, you're going to do a put. Just keep in mind, if you do a put, it's going to overwrite the full resource. So whatever you want to send, it's just going to overwrite the old one. And that's what happened, right? With 3824, and this resource, it was overwritten, and this one right here. And it created a new version of it. And that's why a version had changed to 2. This version is also available in the headers. So if you look at the E tag field, it will give you the version. And this is actually the hard version that's considered the soft version, but those are details. So for the track purposes, I think all you need to look at is the resource here. And if you want to track which version you're getting back here, it's possible to get back older versions if your server supports versioning. Not all servers support versioning. Versioning again is an optional feature. Servers may choose to support it or choose not to support it. So we are not looking at versioning today, but if you're interested in looking at the full history, and if you're server is supporting it, there's a way to get a full history of resources. But we're going to skip that. Okay. So there's one last thing I want to talk about, right? And that is, what if I did not, for some reason, didn't know the ID of my resource? I know that there's a resource for this patient. I know there's a resource for me in there, but I don't know which ID it is, okay? And I want to search for it. So there's a way you can use the get verb to actually do a search and find a particular resource that matches certain given conditions. So if you go back to, so we'll just go back to presentation for a minute and I'll just go over it. And this is the last thing I'm going to talk about today, so we are kind of right on time. So this, usually you do a search interaction using get. You can do it using post, but usually done using get. And as I already defined, it's basically going to search and retrieve an existing resource. And this is how you do it, right? So you have get verb, then you define your base and your type. Again, now I don't have ID, because if I knew the ID, there's no point of search, right? Then I know exactly which resource I'm looking for. The search only matters when I don't know the ID. So I'm going to search, and the way you do search is, this is the syntax. You have to provide this question mark, and then you have to provide the parameter and the search value. So let's take a look at an example, right? So maybe, and there's no body, because this is a get verb. But we earlier looked at get verb. There's no body with it. You're trying to get something from the server, not sending something into the server. So, okay, it thought it's a link, but it's not a link. But anyway, so this is what it is. So it has a base URL. It has your type of the resource, and then here's your parameter search. So it's saying, I want to search for patient where family is Valeria, for example, right? So that's what it's searching for. And one thing you should have to keep in mind is the response when you get back, if your search is successful. So by the way, if your search ends up reporting more than one result back, it's going to actually fail. The search is going to fail. So you have to, actually no, search will not fail, but conditional ones fail. Sorry, never mind. So this one, yeah. So if you do a search and if you have multiple resources responding, coming back, you can actually get multiple resources back. And that's why if it's a successful search, your response is going to carry a resource type called bundle. So it's not going to be just a simple resource. Like until now, when we did a get, we saw a simple resource coming back. Now, when we do a search, we will see that the response we will get, it will actually be a resource of type bundle. So we'll take a look at that. So I'm going to do a search, right? So remember, on one of them, I had changed the family name. So I'm going to search for that one. And now I'm not providing any ID because I don't know which resource it is. So I'm going to ask the server to find it for me. And body doesn't matter. Headers are all right. All right. So I'm going to send it. Okay. So I got a response saying okay. And he's saying in the body, if you see, I got a resource back, right? What I expect always in a body is a resource. But this time I got the resource type is bundle. I was looking for a patient, but I got a bundle back. So what's going on? So what happens is bundle is a special type of resource that is defined by FHIR. And what bundle does is exactly what it says. It bundles multiple resources. And the reason it's doing a bundle is because your search might end up returning back more than one resource. It's possible that I had multiple, like my whole family was there. If my whole family was there on the server, you would get multiple people with the last family name. So there will be multiple resources coming back in response, and FHIR is going to bundle them. The FireServer is going to bundle them together and create a bundle resource. And there's some metadata out there that you can see right here. There's some metadata, but at the end of it, right, at the core of it is actually a patient resource. So what there'll be a field called entry, and in that field there will be a field called resource, and that field resource will actually now carry the resource. So this is exactly what I wanted. In my get earlier, I was only getting this, but now I'm getting this bundle kind of enveloping around it, right? Some kind of packaging around it so that I can have more than one resource here. So that's what a bundle is. As you can see, this entry is repeatable. This entry is an array, which means there are multiple resources, multiple entries in here. So right now we only got one, and you can actually see how many we have. It says total. It gives you the total number in the bundle. So it says only one. Because there was only one resource with that last name, I got back only one. Okay, so I think that's it. That's really it. I mean, for now, I think all we needed to know, at least for our track, most of what we'll need to know about posting or about exchanging data is just this. Are there any questions? So I see one. Let's see. So database, so the question is, how are we storing the FHIR message in database? So database, if there is a database, so first of all, FireServer database is different from FireServer. Okay, database is a persistent storage that sits behind the server, and a server, I mean, for example, a lot of these public servers will not really provide you a lot of storage space. They might have a limited, but really can't provide you that bigger storage space, right? So so database is going to sit behind the server, and the server is going to interact with it, get the resources from there. Now, the data might be getting stored in the database in a completely different way. Okay, it might be SQL, it might be Postgres, it could be Mongo, it could be Graph, any kind of database, right? So it doesn't matter. That's why you have a FireServer, because the FireServer is going to make sure that the data that you get back, the response that you get back, is in the right format. And remember, I showed you that when you post your request, right? So supposing when I posted my GET request, I mentioned here that I want data back in JSON. Okay, you could have done an XML here. Let's see if, I don't know if this server supports it, but some servers will support this, right? So if I do XML there, then I should get back an XML response. Okay, so let's see if this works here. But remember, this is nothing to do with how it's getting stored. It might be getting stored in any other format internally. This is how the server is going to respond back to you. So yeah, so here I got an XML back. See that? So I asked for XML, so it's giving me XML. It's the same resource, nothing has changed. So if you look here, it is the same resource, 3824. Okay. But for the track, let's work with JSON. JSON by far you will find is most prevalent nowadays, and a lot of servers like Google server will not even support XML. So it's better to stick to JSON, because JSON pretty much everybody supports, and XML may or may not be supported. But FHIR standard as such allows for 3 formats, like we discussed last time. Any specific database or storage good for storing FHIR message? I guess that really depends. I'm not even a database person to be able to answer that, but I would think a graph database would be better, because the data, that's the structure of your data. But as I said, you can store it in pretty much any format you want, or any database structure you want. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we are over time, and I think some of the people have already left, so we're going to end the call today. I'm going to stop the recording.